Okay, so welcome attendees. I want to thank you for taking time to learn about the Recreational Amenities study on the Erie Canal. We're very excited to share the findings with all of you to see what's happening on a broader scale, to see what the trail looks like on a regional level, and to take back ideas and recommendations so you can prioritize future investments in your own communities. This study was a joint effort between Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor and the New York State Canal Corporation, with funding from the Canal Corporation and the Department of Environmental Conservation's Mohawk River Basin Program. Due to funding and staffing and not wanting to take on more than what we could manage, we only studied the land and water trails of the Erie Canal, but it is the intent to study the Cayuga Seneca, Champlain, and Oswego canals at a later date. So just as an FYI. We worked with Colliers Engineering and Design to conduct the study, and they did a wonderful job. So now we'll go to introductions. My name is Mona Karen. I'm the Director of Trails and Stewardship for the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. We also are joined by Sasha and Leanne as co-presenters, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Sasha Del Perel. I work for the New York State Canal Corporation as the trail manager, but I also work on other recreation-oriented projects and look forward to talking with you all today. Leanne?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Leanne Kimber. I'm with Colliers Engineering and Design. We were the firm that was engaged to undertake this study, and I was the project manager on that effort.
Here, something just happened with my teams. I don't know what.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So we'll go on to the agenda. I'll be sharing some background on the study and why it was needed. And then Leanne will take us through the study. Sorry, I'm adding some people to the meeting. Leanne will take us through the study, and Sasha will share information about recently released guiding documents from Canal Corporation and funding sources. So we'll move on to the next slide. So we decided to study the recreational amenities on the Erie Canal and Canalway Trail because, you know, as you all have noticed, the uptick in use since the completion of the Empire State Trail. Add to that the development of the water trail programs like Canalway Challenge, On the Canals, and the events and tourism infrastructure grants. All of those have brought more people to use the trails. And we've also been celebrating the bicentennial for the Erie Canal. And this study is very much, you know, a forward-looking document to help bring us into the next century. With multiple users of the Erie Canal, the Canalway Trail, the water trail, the system was starting to pose a challenge for creating a consistent and predictable experience for all the visitors. So this study considers how to address these challenges for the next century. We'll move on to the next slide. And here's a vision statement that we put together jointly with Canal Corporation. And we have a shared vision for both the trailway and the water trail, and that is to make it a world-class destination for recreation, to gain recognition as one of the most accessible trails in the nation, to evolve from a linear recreation way to a complete network of waterways, parks, and trails. And finally, to create a consistent and predictable experience on the trail. So, you know, you all have seen the report. If not, it's available on our website, eriecanalway.org. And we'll take you through the plan now. So I'm going to shift over to Sasha, and she has some slides to share.
Great. So hi, everyone. I wanted to just mention what the Canal Corporation has been working on over the last few years. And this definitely goes without saying, but this is an important year for the Erie Canal as we celebrate its bicentennial. And this important milestone has prompted a lot of, thought and discussion about the next century of the canal system. as we look to continue to transition from a system of industry and commerce to a recreational corridor. And in May of this year, the Canal Recreation Way Commission, a commission that was established by law in 1992, released the Canal's 2050 Recreation Plan. This plan builds off the strong foundation laid in the commission's first and only Recreation Way Plan, which was released in 1995. And it sets the vision for the next 25 years and beyond for the canal system. The plan sets a long-term framework for improving access, amenities, and also talks about experiences along the canal system. It was developed over the course of nearly 2 years and with extensive stakeholder input. And the plan outlines strategic priorities for investment and revitalization over the next few decades. This plan is not only intended for Canal Corporation use, but also aimed at Canalway communities, stakeholders, businesses, and advocates. And I want to just mention the themes that are featured in the plan. And there's 7 themes, and one is about care. How do we care for an expansive, aging infrastructure of the canal? So how do we develop designs and maintenance guidelines for all landscapes and facility types? We also want to convene, so finding ways to bring people to the system through infrastructure and interpretation. We want to connect. We want to build connections between upstate and downstate, and even among our own canal resources. Like, how do we bridge connections between existing trails and the Canalway Trail and waterway systems? We also want to commemorate the history and culture of the canal, but also introducing it to new audiences and representing all different types of audiences. We want to catalyze the canal, so bringing revitalization to canal communities by developing and embracing local identities and establishing public spaces and amenities. Oops, sorry, I just skipped. We want to champion, so we want to be advocates locally and statewide for quality of life and inclusivity for all types of users and all types of abilities. And lastly, we want to cultivate natural resources along the canal system, work on develop eco-regions so that we're not fighting against nature, we're working with nature. And so can we go to the next slide?
Mhm.
In line with this, we've also been thinking about our system as a whole and our canal property. And the attempt with the 2050 vision is to, once again, transition to more of a recreational corridor and provide a more consistent and park-like environment. And so one of the ways we are doing that is by adopting new signage and branding guidelines for Canal Corporation property. On the left, you'll see of the screen, you'll see new Canal Corporation and Canalway Trail tourism identifiers. So the top one is our site identifier, and that will be the new look that you'll see on our equipment and lock houses and waterway signage, as well as facility signs. This identifier is intended for Canal Corporation use and less necessary for wayfinding off of Canal Corporation land. So just as an example, DOT might want to use that blaze signaling that there's a lock house nearby, but that's not our property, so DOT would use that logo. The identifier underneath it is the new brand for the Canalway Trail, and it is intended for use by all Canalway Trail maintainers and owners, regardless of ownership. So when you see a trail blaze with the arrow underneath it, the hope is that as we roll out the signage and also replace new signage, that we would be using these signs or these new identifiers. And then we've also adopted new signage design guidelines for Canal Corporation and permitted property. These guidelines are for land-based signage and provide required graphics, standards, fonts, colors, materials, and also installation details for wayfinding interpretive signs. We have a lot of signage out on our system. I'm sure all of you have been out on the waterway and trail and seen all the different colors and variations of types of signs that exist. And so once again, we're looking to provide some consistency when you go to state land or you go to state parks facilities, you know that you're on that property because you have the same branding. So we would like to provide that for our property as well. The rollout of this signage will happen gradually and on an as needed basis. So as we're seeing deteriorated signs and also based on our maintenance schedule, we will replace them. So we're not doing a wholesale replacement, and we do not expect those with permits with us to do a wholesale replacement because of the release of these new standards. And then, sorry, next slide. Looking at my own notes. And lastly, we've also adopted a new set of Canalway amenity standards, which we're calling the Kit of Parts. The Kit of Parts shown here features new bike racks, repair stations, drinking fountains, light posts, and benches that will be standard now across New York State Canal Corporation property and as we do projects. For anyone seeking to do a project on Canal Corporation land through a permit, you would need to comply with these new standards. The standards were identified with focus on accessibility and inclusion, the types of needs that recreationalists have stated they wanted, and then also based on like sustainability with regards to like maintenance. So materials that hold up over a long time, and also cost was considered in there, right? We're not picking the highest costs benches. We're picking something that we as Canal Corporation and other communities can purchase easily. And in this new standard, we have recommended vendors. So it will hopefully be easy for anyone looking to do a project on Canal Corporation property to get a quote and go out and do these types of projects. And once again, these are only required for Canal Corporation land. However, we certainly would welcome you to consider them in your future designs if you wish to. And so this kind of, as we have adopted these new standards, it certainly lent itself very well to doing this study because we need to understand what exists out on the system before we can really roll out any type of branding, signage, amenities refresh. And so this really worked itself well with the release of this amenity study that we've been working on with Erie Canal and Colliers. And so it's all happening all at once. And I think that this is a really great way for us to enter into this next century of the canal system. So I'll pass it over to Leanne to really get into the meat of this report and let you know what the recommendations are by the region. So thank you, Leanne, and thank you all.
Thanks, Sasha. Nice to meet you all. For those of you who just joined us, my name is Leanne Kimber. I'm with Colliers Engineering and Design. We're an architecture and engineering firm. I am an urban planner, and I was the project manager on this study. So this study has a very long name, the Conditions Assessment and Long-Term Planning for Recreational Amenities on the Erie Canal, what we refer to as the Amenities Study. And I want to just set the stage before we get into the nitty-gritty of methods and findings and recommendations, just to help everyone be on the same page about what the purpose of the study was, who it's for, how it's going to be used, kind of the level of recommendations. So, of course, we were engaged by Erie Canalway and Canal Corporation to undertake this study. I'm sure they would likely be the primary users of the report. It will be a great reference for them as they are planning for future capital investments, when they are considering grant applications for new amenities in certain locations. This will be a great reference and a guide. But in addition to that, it's also a fantastic resource for any communities, nonprofits, organizations of any sort that are located along the canal or have some sort of interest in improving the canal. That also extends to potential private vendors who might be interested in something like a bike rental program or a kayak rental program along the canal. This will be a great resource to see at, a single glance what's out there now, where there are gaps and what's needed. But I just want to really stress right up front that this is meant to be a guiding document. This is not an edict or any sort of, recipe for success on the canal. I think you all know your communities best. You know what people are asking for and what they need, and what works well and what doesn't. So I think use this as a guide as you will. It'll certainly give you insight into Canal Corporation and Erie Canalway's priorities. But at the end of the day, I think both organizations rely on local partners heavily to enhance the canal and to understand what's needed. So we identified 4 project goals that were sort of our direct outcomes of this study. The first is just understand what's out there. So what amenities are on the canal right now and on the Canalway Trail? What is their condition? We also identified gaps in the system. So places where there is a really long distance between 2 restrooms or 2 picnic areas. We also talk to many stakeholders and focus groups to get a better understanding of how people are using the trail now, what they'd like to be able to accomplish on the trail, and what sort of experience they'd like to be having, and how amenity investment can lend itself to that improvement. And then all of that kind of culminating in identifying opportunities to enhance amenities along the trail. Those 4 project goals feed really nicely into some broader strategic goals that were identified as sort of the impetus for this study. And Mona touched on this a little bit at the beginning. Left to right, we want to enhance the recreational experience for all users on the trail, create a distinct sense of place. I think a lot of the strategies that Sasha mentioned just a moment ago help to further that goal as well, but this will be a key component to that. Enhancing accessibility and making this trail a place with amenities for people of all abilities, and no matter what your ability or your access to mobility, to be able to enjoy the trail and to take advantage of this incredible resource in upstate New York. And lastly, to strengthen long-term stewardship. So by encouraging more engagement with the community, more frequent and commonplace use of this trail, can we foster enhanced stewardship between communities and the trail. In terms of our methodology, we had several sources of information that fed into the study. So I mentioned stakeholder input. That was a key part of this. We used several guiding documents and online resources, most importantly, the New York State Canalway Water Trail Guidebook and the Erie Canalway's Hand Launch Guidebook. I would say the largest input to this study was our, first person inventory of the entire trail system, both the Erie Canal and Canalway Trail, to collect, geolocated data points for every amenity. And then this was also informed by best practices research, not only related to accessibility, but also just looking at other trails and other success stories that we've seen. All of those data sources fed into our analysis, which was some quantitative, some in GIS, to get a better understanding of condition, amenity spacing, what types of amenities are available relative to what people would like to see available, and also barriers to accessibility. Based on that analysis, we were able to identify several recommendations for spacing of amenities, best practices to enhance accessibility, locations of hubs and nodes where amenities should be concentrated and maybe a focus of investment, and then also, on a global scale, what are the needs and opportunities to enhance amenities? Wanted to give a little bit of a closer look at our stakeholder interview process. So this was the key source of engagement during the study. We held 16 focus groups. Some of them were with individual organizations. So we met with some key partners in Canal Corporation, Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, but we also Mona did a fantastic job of compiling several interest groups and user groups from across the state who sat in on focus groups to tell us not only from their own experience what they see in their region on the trail, but also what they hear from other users and how, places that they really like, places that they think need improvement, and how the system overall could be improved. I think it's probably no surprise that every group had different priorities based on location or based on, mode of travel. But the thing that we heard loud and clear across every single group was the need for enhanced consistency and predictability along the trail. So consistency meaning you're seeing the same types of amenities, the same access to amenities, no matter where you are along the trail. And predictability meaning, I can reasonably expect I will see a restroom every X number of miles. and I will have access to information through wayfinding that will help me find those amenities. In terms of the 3 amenities that everyone said would be critical to an enhanced recreational experience, restrooms, drinking water, and signage were most consistently mentioned, which makes a lot of sense because that's something that's going to be used by everyone, whether you're on a boat, a paddlecraft, or a bicycle. So just wanted to share some high-level highlights of our stakeholder interviews. When we got to the inventory, in terms of geographic scope, I just want to highlight that we did inventory the entire trail from North Tonawanda to Waterford, both the Erie Canal and the Canalway Trail. So for the Canalway Trail or the land trail, we biked the entire length of it and collected data using mobile devices with a GPS-based survey application. And then for the canal itself, we did not paddle or boat the entire canal, but we did use the guidebook to identify access points along the canal and visited those to collect amenities there as well. For the purpose of analysis and recommendations, just to make things a little bit more digestible, we divided the system into 4 regions. Region 1 is the one that is the focus of this workshop today, and that begins in Rome and ends in Waterford. Region 2 goes from Baldwinsville or Camillus to Rome. Region 3, Fairport to Baldwinsville or Camillus, and Region 4, North Tonawanda to Fairport. I want to give a better sense, because we have gotten a few questions already about how we made decisions of not so much what amenities to collect, but where to collect them and kind of where we drew the line in terms of, is this associated with the trail or is it not? And you can imagine that's a really difficult distinction to make. I'll just start by saying that we really tried to focus on things that were immediately visible or in the immediate vicinity of the trail, things that were clearly related to trail use, and things that if you are a bicyclist traveling along the trail and you're not familiar with the area, you would reasonably rely on these amenities for your services. So just looking at this example on the screen, Amherst Veterans Canal Park, this is a pretty small park. All of the uses within this park are directly related to canal or canalway trail use. Both trails run directly through the park. And so in this case, we would have collected all of the amenities at this location. Conversely, this is Parrington Park, which is just outside of Fairport. This is a much larger park that, yes, does serve the canal, but also has a much broader community aspect to it and a larger community draw. So in this case, we would have focused on the collection zone that I'm showing here. So parking, restrooms, benches and picnic areas that are directly related to the trail and very close to the trail and can be seen from the trail. Things like playgrounds, basketball courts, auxiliary parking that's further away are not things that we would have inventoried. And then I also want to mention that our sort of first-person inventory was primarily focused on publicly accessible locations, though we do know that there are several private marinas and campsites along the canal and the Canalway Trail that are well used by recreationists. So those locations, we did not specifically visit them because we did not coordinate to access all of that private property. But we relied on secondary sources of information, whether it was the guidebook or websites or other online sources, to at least make sure that we were able to digitize them and factor them into our gap analysis. But just to be aware, we did not conduct a conditions assessment of those privately owned amenities. In terms of the amenities that we did collect, the list shown on your screen was our list that we worked from, and we built a survey application to collect this information. In total, we collected over 6,500 amenities across both trails. And, at that scale, you can imagine we were not doing, specific measurements or detailed assessments. This was really meant to be a high-level visual assessment of the condition, the type, and any barriers to accessibility that were immediately obvious from a visual perspective. So we did collect things like material type, capacity. So if you had a bike rack, we might say, have a number for this can hold 6 bikes or something like that. We took a photo of every amenity that we collected through the app. So all of that, it is a very rich data set that will be a great resource for folks going forward. Based on all that data, we conducted a conditions assessment to give sort of a global view of what is sort of the condition rating of amenities along the trail. And so there was a recent study that was done for Canal Corporation in 2022 that assessed many assets along the trail, some recreation, some beyond recreation. And they used a 3-tiered classification system of good, fair, and poor. We decided early on with Erie Canal Corporation to maintain that system to make sure that there could be consistency across these 2 studies. So those are sort of the definitions that you see on your screen. Anything that was good has very limited wear and tear. Everything works and operates properly. Something that's fair may have some wear and tear, but still functions. And anything that's in poor condition either doesn't operate or would not be safe to use. So that was sort of a pretty high threshold. And then the pictures on your screen just give you a couple examples of bike repair stations that we saw along the trail, just to give you a visual of what good, fair, or poor would look like. And these are shown in the report as well. Similarly, with hand launches, so we used 3 low docks to show a nice comparison of, 3 of the same type of dock that could be used by a paddler. What would good, fair, or poor look like in that scenario? So just a couple examples there as well. On a global scale, so these charts shown on the right give you a sense of when you take all the amenities on the trail as a whole, what does the condition look like? And I think we were pleasantly surprised to see that based on that rating system, between 65 and 85% of amenities on the system, depending on the region, were in good condition, which is great to see. But this also does kind of help us highlight where there may be a greater concentration of amenities that are in poor condition, or may need additional investment. What we see is that, so the chart at the top is all amenities on both trails. The second one is all amenities on the Erie Canal or the New York State Canalway Water Trail. And then the bottom is the Erie Canalway Trail or the land trail. So we kind of noticed based on this that regions 1 and 2, which is region 1 is the one that we're talking about today, you see a larger percentage of amenities in fair or poor condition when it's talking about the Erie Canal. And then conversely, in regions 3 and 4, the Erie Canalway Trail potentially needs more attention for investment. This gives you a view of within region 1, so Rome to Waterford, how do amenity by amenity, how do they stack up against each other? And you can see that generally, I think things are looking pretty good in region 1. A large percentage that are in good condition. A couple things that stand out to us are that bicycling amenities, so bike racks and bike repair stations, as well as benches, are among amenities in region 1 are in the need of greatest investment. So we see about 8 to 10% of those that are in need of repair or replacement. Across the board, not only in region 1, but in the other regions as well, we noticed consistently that parking lots and picnic areas are more commonly in poor condition and would require focused investment. So you see that reflected here in region 1, but I would say that's not dissimilar to the other regions as well. And then I just want to note the numbers on the right are the total number, your N value, basically, of how many of those amenities we collected in this region, just to give a sense of scale. When you're looking at only 7 marinas where we assessed condition, it's great to see that they're all in good condition, but the larger number you get, the more likely it is that you may have some in poor condition. I mentioned earlier that accessibility was something that at a very high level we did look for when we were assessing the amenities. I don't want to give any sort of misconception that this was an accessibility assessment. That is a study unto itself that involves engineers and very specific experts in that field. This was meant to give a starting point for further consideration and further assessment, but we did kind of rate amenities based on the level of accessibility as well. Based on our findings, we did pull out a couple of examples of ways to enhance design for accessibility. And in this case, this is shown in the report as well. We're showing hand launches that are marketed as adaptive to highlight some places where some designs may be better than others. So the one on the left, designing for assistance, we heard consistently from stakeholders that although the purpose of this equipment is that it can be operated independently, there are those who prefer to have assistance when using an adaptive hand launch. And so the picture on the left, which is in Pittsford, you can see that there's a platform on both sides of the rollers so that someone using the rollers could be assisted by another person on the dock. In contrast, this one in Palmyra, you have a nice large platform to use the rollers, but beyond that is just water. No one could access it from the other side to help you get on. And people said that that would be, very helpful to have. So just highlighting that. And then I think similarly thinking about not only the adaptive equipment, but also the connections to that adaptive equipment. So I think all three of the launches shown on this side of the screen would be considered adaptive and do meet accessibility standards, except that when you look at how people access them, in this case in Baldwinsville, there was a very nice transition plate, a very level surface to get onto the gangway. This one in Half Moon, similar setup, however, the surface that it's connected to is a little uneven with a lip, and that could present a difficulty for someone in a wheelchair. And then this one in Palmyra, where you have a very nice landing space, but beyond that was you don't see it in the picture, but a long rocky path to a parking lot. And so making sure that that can be paved so that people can access the entire thing from their car to the launch is important. I don't think any of this will come as any surprise to any of you. What's shown on the screen, I think anyone probably who's interested in this workshop is probably here because they spend a lot of time enhancing recreation and enhancing recreational amenities. So I'm sure accessibility is at the forefront of those conversations, but it's still worth documenting in the report. That accessibility is a focus of design for new investment for Erie Canalway and for Canal Corporation, beyond the minimum standard that is, required per ADA or ABA. I think the two resources that Erie Canalway and Canal Corporation have provided are excellent guides for installing and implementing accessible equipment. And I think something that I wouldn't say it was surprising, but it was something that was remarkable that came out of our stakeholder interviews is the idea that we don't just want to be, opportunistically putting accessible amenities just anywhere. What would really make this system strong and make it more of an accessible recreation destination is to create networks of accessible hubs and nodes. And so if you have one place with a beautiful adaptive launch and it's well connected to a parking lot, other accessible amenities that are supportive. But once you get in the water, there's nowhere else for you to go to access a similar thing. That can really limit the recreational experience and limits the amount of travel you can do on the canal. And so if we can create a series of hubs and nodes where multiple places where adaptive equipment is available, that really enhances the experience. And I think additionally, people, accessibility and what's accessible is different for any two people that you talk to. So giving people access to information so they know exactly what's available at each of the locations along the trail helps them kind of choose their own adventure and choose the experience that's going to work well for them. And then lastly, I just want to highlight that, so this is a graphic from the Hand Launch Facility Design Guide, and certainly epitomizes what it would mean to design an adaptive hand launch that's fully accessible. That said, in speaking with stakeholders who paddle on the canal a lot, they mentioned that something like this is fantastic if you plan to use this type of equipment. But if you're a person who either can't use the rollers because of the type of craft you have, or you just don't feel comfortable using it and would prefer to do a bank launch or something like that, this actually doesn't allow you to launch or land because the platform is too high and there's a rail around it. And so what they recommended is including multiple methods of launching at various locations. So you might have something like what's shown on the screen, but it would be paired with, a boat ramp or a bank launch or something else that makes people feel comfortable. So people can choose what works best for them. So I think that's an important consideration when thinking about enhancing accessibility. So that kind of covers the conditions aspect. Then we get into our gap analysis. And the first thing that we did was come up with a couple of sort of guidelines and benchmarks that we wanted to use against which to assess the existing conditions on the trail. And so the first thing we did was identify, based on stakeholder interviews and our own knowledge of best practices, how far apart should these amenities be in an ideal world? And so that's really based on how frequently folks who use the trail are using these amenities. So a restroom you might be using every few hours, whereas laundry you might only be using every few days. And so those are very different needs. So we came up with spacing recommendations based on how far people would travel in that time frame. And those are shown here as well as in the report. The previous slide was amenities that would be shared by all users. This kind of breaks it down by amenities that are specific to bicyclists, boaters, and paddlers, but it's the same idea. How frequently are these being used, and therefore how far apart should they be? I will highlight that in speaking with several boaters, especially long distance boaters, we were kind of struck at how infrequently they would need to use the amenities that they rely on. And based on that, it kind of what we saw is that, I don't want to say boaters are good, but the spacing of boater amenities such as marinas, power and water pedestals, sewage pump outs are very well positioned along the canal. So we didn't see any obvious need to add that. Doesn't mean that there's not opportunities to improve it, but just based on purely a gap analysis, I wanted to highlight that. We also set out to define and identify a series of hubs and nodes, and how you would actually define those and what would qualify as either a hub or a node. This is meant to be, again, a reference. There are going to be exceptions to every one of these rules. But in general, we wanted to have some way of sort of creating an organizing principle around which our recommendations could be based. And so the way we defined it is that both hubs and nodes would have three things: proximity to some center of activity, connections to ideally both the Erie Canalway Trail and the Erie Canal itself. In places where that's possible, we recognize that in some places the two diverge, and some concentration of amenities. And then the difference between hubs and nodes really comes down to scale. A hub is going to have a wider variety of amenities, close to a larger center of activity, whereas a node may be more minor in scale. And then that feeds really well into this chart that we developed to identify what would be the highest priorities of amenities to host at hubs and nodes. And so priority 1 in the dark blue are things that would kind of rise to the top, and priority 2 are sort of the lesser priorities. And you'll see again in this slide, hubs tend to have more amenities and a wider variety, whereas nodes have less. And I think one good example is just to note in the top line. So at a hub, you might want to prioritize having a permanent restroom. It might be a good benchmark to say every hub should have a permanent restroom in an ideal world. Conversely, at a node, it would be nice to have a permanent restroom. Certainly wouldn't be a bad thing to have, but a temporary restroom such as a porta potty would certainly serve the purpose. And we heard many times from stakeholders that as long as it's well maintained and clean, users tend to be very happy to use that. And so those are sort of the differentiations we made between hubs and nodes. Based on sort of those guiding principles, we undertook a needs assessment to identify opportunities, and I'll start with those that are specific to this location, so specific to Region 1 from Rome to Waterford. Just checking on my time here. So I want to sort of set the stage before I actually get into the recommendations, just to tell you what it is that we determined based on our analysis. So the three things that we were identifying are: where are hubs and nodes ideally located? Where do we see major gaps in amenities? And where do we see candidate locations, whether at hubs or nodes or outside of hubs or nodes, to invest in amenities that could start to fill those gaps? The recommendations that I'll share, similar to the guiding principles I mentioned above, are guidance only. They give a good idea of where investment might be needed. They certainly do not preclude other types of investment that are maybe not mentioned as a specific need or not mentioned in that location. I think we all agree that any investment along the trail is going to improve the trail, but this just gave us a way of focusing our recommendations. So this is a map. You'll see this series of maps in the report as well. So these are the hubs and nodes that we identified for Region 1. A couple of considerations that we we're thinking about as we identified these are spacing. So we wanted to make sure that there were no more than, I think, 50 miles between hubs. I think in this case, hubs are located between 20 and 40 miles from each other. We wanted to see, some consistent concentration of amenities, connections to either one or two trails, and then also connections to community. And I know you all probably are aware that connections to community is a little more challenging in this region than in other regions, just given the nature of the Mohawk River and its location and tendency to flood. So that's something that we highlight in the report as well. This map I love. I know it's a lot to look at, but it does give a very clear snapshot of exactly what key amenities are available at hubs and nodes and what is not available right now. So you'll see any icon that's in a bold color, that's something that's currently available. Anything that's grayed out is not currently available. And then anything that's red is something that was assessed to be in poor condition and so may warrant a closer look for replacement or removal. Going into we tried to group these just to not overwhelm the maps. And so we start with shared amenities, which talks about restrooms and drinking water. And we've differentiated between permanent and temporary restrooms here. Overall in this region, I think these are very well spaced. We see restrooms kind of well spaced along the trail in this region. Just about every hub has a permanent restroom with the exception of Mohawk Harbor. And there's only one gap that we saw between drinking fountains, which was between Little Falls and Amsterdam. And so, if there was an opportunity to invest and add something like that anywhere along that stretch, that would certainly improve the experience for all users. I think one thing we highlighted in the report is that Half Moon, Crescent Park and Half Moon has a very well used and well loved adaptive hand launch, does have access to nearby convenience store for restrooms and things like that, but a simple investment of a portable restroom could even further enhance or activate that area and make it more widely usable. Looking at paddler amenities specifically, so this focuses on launches and boat rentals. Something that we tried to we saw as a need and maybe an ideal to strive for was to have a boat rental or a paddlecraft rental at every hub. And so we're kind of highlighting here places where those don't currently exist. So Rome and Amsterdam are two places where we do not currently have those, but all the other hubs do, and some of the nodes as well. And you can see, thanks to Upstate Kayak Rentals, that those are very prolific in the eastern part of this region, which is fantastic. We also, based on stakeholder interviews, heard that, rentals pair very well with adaptive equipment. So in a place where you might see an adaptive hand launch, that would be a great candidate to add a boat rental opportunity. I think adaptive launches are not only for people with a mobility impairment, they're fantastic for people who just haven't kayaked before and this is their first time getting in the water. Anything we can do to remove barriers to people who might be considering recreation on the canal, having those two things paired together, I think would go a long way to achieving that goal. And so we've kind of highlighted places where that might be the case on these maps. Boater amenities, you aren't going to see any flags here because, as I said, they're very well spaced. We didn't see any immediate concerns in this region for boaters. Thinking about the Erie Canalway Trail, you see a similar gap in drinking fountains. So that's probably not a surprise. I think if there were going to be an investment, I know drinking in fountains is a very difficult investment to make, considering the fact that they're operable and can break, and also that they require potable water. So if there were going to be that sort of investment, we'd certainly want to make sure that it's something that both trail users can access. And then I just mentioned in a couple of places here we see that there were more frequent amenities, and I'll just skip back, available to water trail users, fewer to land trail users. So anything that can be done to enhance those connections, either through physical connections or wayfinding, would make this area more user-friendly for bicyclists, pedestrians, runners, that sort of thing. And then lastly, focusing in on bicyclist amenities. This kind of part and parcel with paddling. I think we see opportunities at hubs to reach an ideal where there are bike rentals available at each one of those. And I know in the eastern part of this region, similarly, you have Capital Bike Share, which gives people that opportunity. The further west you go, the less likely that is. And so that would certainly be something that I think would be relied on by private vendors to provide that amenity. So that's something worth exploring, but I know that comes with, certain levels of complication as well. Bike racks seem to generally be very well spaced here, and repair stations as well. So those are sort of our highlights of needs within the region itself. We did also identify some trail-wide needs and opportunities. I've kind of touched on this a little bit in looking at the region itself, but overall, thinking about limited dollars available for capital investment, how do we make the entire trail system work for everyone and make amenities and sites and access points welcoming to all types of users so that you can really maximize the benefit of capital investment dollars. One thing we noticed is that throughout the trail, things like showers and laundry, things that are being used by long distance travelers, tend to be geared more towards water trail users. They might be located at a marina and geared more towards boaters. But we do see and have heard that there is a lot of interest in long distance bicycling on the trail. And so if there was a way to either, again, through wayfinding or physical connections, make people aware that those are available and gear them towards all users, I think that would go a long way. Similarly, locks and marinas tend to be geared towards boaters in terms of their scale and just the way that they feel when you arrive there in a paddlecraft. So I think we heard from several stakeholders that you arrive there, it's very ominous. You're coming into a lock and you might not feel comfortable locking through. You'd like to be able to get out and walk your boat around. But sometimes those sort of landing places and portage trails are not immediately obvious. So how can we enhance those and enhance signage related to them to make them feel more welcoming and kind of give people the sense that, yes, you are here, you're allowed to be here, you can do this thing. I think the same thing goes for campsites, which again, camping along the trail, I think we rely very heavily on locks to provide that opportunity. And again, we noticed even just through our inventory that a lot of times those places don't feel that welcoming. There's not much of a sense of place when you arrive there. And so enhancing sense of place, more signage, ways to access information, just something to say, yes, you can camp here, I think would go a long way for long distance travelers. Signage and wayfinding, I know I've kind of harped on this several times throughout the study, and I know Canal Corporation is, through this new signage standards, will be going a long way towards enhancing this. But what we heard from stakeholders is that this is one of the most important things, and that in an ideal world, people would like to be able to navigate the entire trail without ever having to pull out their phone. And yes, we probably all have phones now, but it kind of detracts from the experience. So a few things they highlighted to us that would make that a better experience is, consistent mile markers. We see a lot of variety along the trail in, whether or not they exist, and there are pretty large gaps where they don't exist. And then sort of inconsistent types, like this is a very informal version. This one looks very nice. I think this is what people would like to see and see it consistently along the trail. Water trail markers, we understand these were installed as sort of an indicator to people on the water, but I think a lot of people think of them as, this is my first point of access of, even from a car coming to a parking lot, and this is how I know that I'm at the water trail, and yes, I can access the water here. So the idea of maybe extending these out closer to the street as well might be a helpful indicator to people who aren't familiar with the area. On-road trail markers, I think we're fairly limited in what we can do with these. We understand that these are governed by MUTCD, and so where they go, how big they are, that is all strictly regulated. But I just want to document that people who traverse the on-road portions of the Erie Canalway Trail mentioned that as a challenge, especially at decision points and places where you need to turn. In terms of wayfinding to find destinations either along the trail or off the trail, Folks were kind of focused on signage that would give a simple direction and a destination and a distance. So the one on the left, simple, visible, well-maintained, is sort of their ideal. I think the one next to that, Pittsford to Genesee Valley Park, is a good example. Doesn't tell you how far you need to go. And then we just saw a variety of condition along the way, and I wanted to sort of share some of those examples where you might have signs that are overgrown or have become vandalized and makes it difficult to navigate. When you're thinking about arriving at a destination like a hub or a node and trying to access places that are off trail, these two examples on the left were something that people were kind of gravitated towards, something that gives simple directions to a general location like a business district, kind of tells them like, this is the way you go if you need a restaurant or you need some other services, without making the signs so specific that they're going to be outdated as soon as they're printed. Something that's more detailed, like a map, I think we could see, you know, and have seen, these tend to be located at places where people are going to be stopping and resting for a long time. So that's an overview of the recommendations. And again, the report goes into much more detail, but I just wanted to highlight the things that are central to Region 1. The report did identify next steps for Erie Canalway and Canal Corporation. And I think those are generally applicable to anybody who's on this call today. So if you're, you know, a person who is responsible for a part of the trail or a partner community in some way, having a plan in place for how you plan to improve your segment of the trail would be fantastic. You know, associating that with cost estimates and looking for associated funding opportunities, which we're going to speak about in a moment. Engaging with community partners, as I said at the beginning, you all know best what people need. You're talking to them every day. We had an opportunity to speak with folks, but I think you're really on the ground. And so knowing what people need and want would be great. I mentioned this is a very high level accessibility assessment. I think a more detailed assessment that was more location specific at individual locations would help give a much better understanding of some of the barriers and what might be needed. And then we're also encouraging, you know, especially on Canal Corporation land, the incorporation of the new signage standards and amenity design standards. And then thinking about rentals, lastly, opportunities for private partnership for companies that might be interested in providing rentals, I think would go a long way to enhancing access to recreation throughout the trail. So from there, I think I'm passing it back to Sasha for funding opportunities. Okay, so Sasha's going to go through some of the funding opportunities that are available to folks who are interested in improving the canal.
Yeah, so as Leanne mentioned, I want to talk about funding opportunities, right? Because communities and not-for-profits often need help, financial help in being able to secure funding for projects like this. And the good news is there are state and federal and also not-for-profit funding opportunities that exist. And so first I'll talk about options that Canal Corporation has, as well as partnership grants. The first is the Canalway Grant Program. This is offered through the Consolidated Funding Application through New York State. This is a Canal Corporation offered program. It awards up to the total pot of funding is $1 million. It's a competitive grant for canal related capital projects within the canal corridor. It has a minimum funding amount of $25,000 and a maximum funding amount of $150,000. We require a 50% match. A project example could certainly be the establishment of a canal hub or node. This grant, as I mentioned, is part of the broader New York State Consolidated Funding Application process, which many of the state grants run through. These grants typically open in May and close in July and are awarded the beginning of the following year. So our 2025 round is being scored now and will be awarded in January at some point. And then next slide. Well, I guess, sorry, can you just go back for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
we're going to share these slides out. Just, make note of the objectives of the grant program, right? We want to facilitate recreation and tourism, and enhance visitor amenities and improve visitor experience, encourage overnight stay, commemorate the history, make recreational assets more accessible, and improve and promote connectivity between recreation areas. So certainly, everything that Leanne mentioned and the recommendations of this report could fit very nicely into these objectives. You could certainly make a very easy case that your project is, satisfying the grant requirements. So next slide. So the New York State Canal, sorry, next slide.
Nope. We can go back.
Oh,
Are we missing one?
is there another slide?
I think it's just those three.
Go to the previous slide.
The previous slide.
Yep, that one.
Sorry. Maybe
This one.
I might have spoke about the wrong one first. We also have a partnership grant program. Sorry, I'm not sure. We also have a partnership grant program with Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor. And this is our smaller grant program. The idea, it's for events and tourism infrastructure and amenities. The program is intended to capture projects and also programs that fall below the Canalway Grant Program funding threshold. So it's $24,000 and lower. And we also support events that help promote the canal system. On the tourism and amenities side, these do not need to be capital projects. It could include equipment rental. So you can think like portable water fountains or toilets, or also installing a shed to house maintenance equipment, or bike rentals, just as a few examples. We view this grant as being a really great way for communities and not-for-profits to address the amenities gaps that Leanne went over, without really needing to establish a large capital project. So like, you don't need to establish a pocket park or a municipal park to meet the requirements objectives of this grant. All you would have to do is say, like, we're putting in a bench and it's in a downtown area and it's where a gap needs to be filled, and that could certainly meet the objectives of this grant. I want to note that in this year's grant round, we're placing additional emphasis on projects that consider accessibility. So ADA compliance, universal design will certainly be standards that we are looking for. This program also requires a 50% match, but they can be made up with in-kind resources like staff and volunteer time. And applications are going to open up in October on October 14th and close on November 27th with award in February. So certainly look at the report and see if there's anything that comes up that feels important to address. This is a really great funding opportunity, and a pretty streamlined application process. And now on to the other funding sources.
So this was the first one that you spoke about, just to.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm looking at my notes and my slides were slightly different.
All right, and then I'm just going to go ahead to the other funding sources.
Yeah, and just for clarity, so the one that Leanne just had up before, that is our larger Canal Corporation funding grant, and that's the one I spoke about first. And we are scoring those grants now, and we'll award in January. So certainly a grant program, the link is on there, but something for you to consider as we head into next recreation season, May timeframe for application submission. All right, next. And then there's other funding sources. So I'm certainly not the expert in these, but we can get you more information, and the slide deck has the links to all of them. So you can explore them yourself as well. The few at the top are offered through the CFA, so the Consolidated Funding Application process through New York State. These are park grant opportunities. So there's the Environmental Protection Fund grant. It's for park programs, preservation and heritage. So these are also larger kind of capital projects. There's also the Municipal Parks and Recreation Grant Program, also administered through state parks, larger grants as well, capital projects, recreational trails projects. So if there's something that you are looking to do that is trail oriented, active transportation oriented, this is a great program. It's federal funding that's administered through state parks. And so the requirements are definitely, it's a little bit more cumbersome, but a really great funding opportunity, highly competitive grant. And then there's the local waterfront revitalization program that's offered through the Department of State. Those are for big projects, but are really, I mean, if you're looking to do a big project along your waterfront, that is a great funding source, and you can use our small grants program or also our Canal grant program, our larger grants, to couple with the local waterfront revitalization. So that is kind of a unique feature of both our canal grants, is that you can use other state grants as match. And then lastly, we have non-state funding opportunities. So there's the Rails to Trails Conservancy federal funding. There's private not-for-profit funding opportunities through the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation. Western New York oriented. So I think unfortunately for this group, you might be kind of out of the range of this funding. And then Mona, I believe you added in the Athletic Brewing Company funding source. Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, so these are just examples of different types of funding that are not state related, but the Athletic Brewing Company, it's a grant program that's open now, and it's specifically for trail projects. So I don't remember off the top of my head what specifically they are, but if you were to just go to their website, they have everything clearly laid out. So there are many other sources. You just have to do a little research, and you know, some grant programs are specifically for, you know, stewardship and conservation projects on the trail. Some are for infrastructure. So it really all just depends.
Yeah. One other thing I want to note is, as long as you're not applying for Canal Corporation funding or partnership funding with Erie Canalway, like we could certainly always provide, the Canal Corporation could provide a letter of support for another state agency grant. Erie Canalway could certainly provide a letter of support for any other grant application you're looking to supply. And then there's also Parks and Trails New York that has also provided a lot of letters of support for amenities along the trail. So you have partners in us. We would love to see, you know, more amenities be placed along the system. And so don't forget that, like, in addition to funding, we can also be advocates with you. Advocacy is a really important tool in getting these types of projects done. So, you know, we also recognize that there are municipal and county funding for this. It's just about making it known that it's important within your community. So, you know, look to your local, you know, biking groups or paddling groups or Rotary clubs, because they make really good advocates in town board meetings and, you know, writing letters of support. So just a, you know, quick note about that.
I think that pretty much covers it. So I would just have contact information for Mona and Sasha here. And I think we have plenty of time for questions, which is great.
So
Mona, how do you want to
Scott,
facilitate?
we want to,
Okay.
yeah, Scott raised his hand. Scott, do you want to?
I'm trying. Can you guys hear me? I'm trying to use this one. I go back and forth between Zoom. I never know what button to hit.
No, this is working.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to applaud you all. This is exciting stuff. You know, you're giving the customer, the traveler, the user, the experience that they're used to with familiarity and trip planning, and you're taking out uncertainty. You're making it easy for somebody to experience the canal, whether it's a bike, a boat, or whatever. I just wanted to share, and Leanne, maybe you and I can have an offsite conversation, but I put in the chat one of those other funding opportunities because you were talking earlier about connecting upstate to downstate. So I'm the boating guy. I'm with Boat Owners Association United States. There's a large population of recreational vessels in Long Island. They go on summer cruises. They always go up. I shouldn't say always, never say always. They typically go up the New England coast. I'm trying to get them to come up the Hudson and hit the canal and spend. And you sort of, I saw it on one of your slides, one of your amenities was simply parking, right? Vehicle parking at its most basic. Well, boaters need parking too at its most basic, beyond pump outs, beyond restrooms, which I love every 25 miles, that rocks because we need them just like everybody else. But we need parking. We call that transient dockage. It's like the term we use. And parking a car is different than parking a boat. There's all these safety and navigational concerns. And I just wanted to point out there's a boating infrastructure grant program that Boat US championed 30 years ago. There's 2 links. There's a press release that explains it quick, down, and dirty. But then there's a link to the boating infrastructure grant program that's administered in our state through the New York State Parks. And I'm hoping you guys would consider that for your other slide, your other grant opportunity slide. But it basically provides safe overnight transient dockage. As a boater, I don't want my boat being knocked around. I need it protected, those kinds of things. But I noticed on the Canalway, there was opportunities for people to spend overnight, maybe at a historic site, maybe at a town that hasn't looked forward to the canal as an economic opportunity quite well as some others have. A quick example is I had some friends that went up the Champlain Canal and they went by that park north of Schuylerville. There's that new park. And they saw a dock there. And the dock was only big enough for 1 boat, but they were traveling on their week cruise in 2 boats. And they told me they would have stopped there if they could to fit 2 boats. So, like a handicap or a disabled, I apologize, I'm not good at the words, but the stuff that makes it accessible for everybody is not the same thing that a recreational boater uses, is not the same thing as a launch ramp user. They're all different. But these boating infrastructure grants come in 2 flavors. They're matching programs. One's competitive, one's not. You can get up to 1.5 million. And that press release has a photo of what Rochester did with their boating infrastructure grant, put in over 60 slips. And the first step you need is to think about parking for boats and where's somebody going to safely tie up. And there's money for it. We pay into it. It's not a taxpayer funded. I pay it through motorboat fuel taxes and excise taxes on outboard engines, fishing equipment. So it's the user pay, user play. We love it because, the community can't say, hey, you boaters are taking our money, because we're putting it in there. Anyway, it's a wonderful program. And I would love to see one day more communities, and it's available to communities in New York and other places. It's available to private marinas. But, like I say, I'll just finish up by saying a marina isn't necessarily the same thing as a transient dock, isn't necessarily the same thing as a boat ramp. And you know that. I mean, you express that with all the user groups you have here. So
I know it now, having done this study. I didn't know it before.
Yeah, it's great. We can talk later, Leanne, but I gladly, I sing the praises of this program, and it's wonderful.
Thanks for sharing, Scott.
Anybody else have questions or comments?
I'd just like to say one thing. Here, Nino Polidori from St. Johnsville. As being a waterway trail steward, I found some interesting points that I'm going to take to our village board to talk about our marina. So I found it's very interesting.
Great. Yep. That's exactly what we want.
Let's see, Danielle.
Let's see. Danielle
Salisbury,
has her hand up.
Hi, yes, Danielle Salisbury from City of Rome. Our team looked through this amenities study and had one question. about boat rentals specifically, is that something you refer to for paddle crafts only, or is that a suggestion for motorboat rentals as well? I know we kind of touched upon the paddle craft, but I was wondering what the
We
recommendation was
probably should
specifically.
have specified paddlecraft. That's meant to refer to paddlecraft.
Okay, okay, that's what I
yeah.
thought, but we did have places nearby that, especially on the lake, on the mouth of the lake, that do motorboat rentals, and we're just curious about that. So thank you for answering, and also thank you for that, Scott, for those links that you put in there. I know we have a local group here who has been pushing to get actual boat parking, so that's really helpful information. Thank you.
Okay, I see Jack has his hand up.
I'm from Utica, work for the city. Just want to call out Utica a little bit more. I see that you go from Rome, but you don't really, to Waterford in this district. But there's not much, call on Utica. We just had a grand opening of our harbor area. A lot of amenities are coming down there. I just want to make sure that it gets a little bit more recognition. So if you're passing through to stop by, we just actually had about a month or so ago, the Albany Symphony, did a concert down here. We had literally hundreds and hundreds of people. So just bring it to your attention a little bit more as you're doing your studies. We are looking to we do have the canal trail. I'm not a biker and I'm not a boater. I don't mind doing either one, but just don't have them. But just to let everybody know that we are out there, we are alive. I don't know how many actual harbors or working harbors there are in cities along this trail and along the waterway itself. So just keep in the back of your mind to try to stop here, check it out, and see what we're doing here. So
Yeah,
thank you.
that sounds great. I mean, we will be adding amenities as they are added. We will add them to our data set, and they'll be included in, our future water trail guidebook and other online resources. So as things are added, we'll keep adding to our information.
Okay. Yeah, we do have a boat launch.
Yep.
We will have restaurants right on the water. So
Yeah, it's really exciting what's happening in Utica.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks for
I just
sharing.
want to note that if you are participating on this call from a community and there are amenities that you are adding, since we did this study, certainly send them our way, because like Mona mentioned, Erie Canalway and Parks and Trails New York feature as many amenities as they have access to in their guidebooks and trail guides. And so yeah, we want to know. That would be great. Or definitely this report isn't intended to be like a tourism recommendation or a tool for trip planning. It's really intended to be a project planning guide for future investment. So I would see this report as visitors and from user type. So
Jack, did you have another question? I see your hand up.
No, I may have double clicked.
That's
Sorry
right.
that I've got two of me on there, but I connected through my phone. The speaker and everything for the computer wasn't working, but then to try to see the slides on a phone versus everybody else is looking at a computer screen. So I figured, well, I better hook that back up so I can see what you're talking about.
Gotcha. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Well, if you think of anything later, you have our contact information, and you're welcome to either contact me or Sasha with questions or comments. We will try to get this recording up on our website probably towards the end of next week. We have 3 more workshops coming up, 1 for each region. We have 1 more tomorrow and 2 next week. So I appreciate everybody's time. We will get out a little bit early today, so that's always nice. But really appreciate everybody's time today in learning more about the recreational amenities study. And thank you, Leanne and Sasha, for helping us out with this.
Of course, thank you for organizing it.
So,
It's nice to share.
yes, it is very exciting to share.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice to meet all of
Yes.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mona,
Thank
Leanne, and
Thank you,
Sasha.
everybody.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.